You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s to a billion-dollar company. It held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the State of MedTech. I'm joined by a guest I've been dying to have on the show, and that's Ray Cohen, recently retired CEO of Axonics. As you all know from the news, Axonics exited to Boston Scientific for $3.7 billion. But of course, we all remember them because they had this meteoric rise in their space, that kind of got my attention right around 2019, 2020. And so we're here to kind of talk about the lessons learned from that kind of exit. But even more so, Ray's story, like where you got started in the industry, and then we'll kind of get into the whole story behind Axonics. So Ray, thank you so much for joining the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Omar. Pleasure to meet you.
So I want to start with the question that I think a lot of people might be wondering, which is, how did you get started like in our industry? Like, where did you grow up, and how did you end up in medical devices?
Sure. So I would say I was fortunate to grow up in New York City. I think, folks that have had that experience maybe have a little more common sense than others, a little street smarts and things of that nature. So that's where I grew up. I went to college in upstate New York and froze for 4 years with no son and decided to come to California. Primarily, I'd never been on an airplane before in my entire life, actually. And when I graduated college, I flew to California, and I've been here ever since. It's been going on 45 years now.
So when you landed here in California, did you just buy a ticket and just come out here and said you'll figure it out, or what were you doing?
Yes, that's a good question. So yes, I bought a ticket, but my mom insisted that I buy a round trip ticket in case things didn't work out, which is, what you'd expect to hear from your mother, right? But I came to California. I had $300 in my pocket and a suit that my parents had bought me for graduation, and no job. And here we go.
What city did you land?
I landed in the Valley, which back in 1981 was like landing on the moon. Because, the best restaurant was like Marie Callender's or something, I mean, it was a really kind of bit of a bizarre place back
Coming
in the day.
From New York.
Yeah. I mean, where we had, pizza parlor in every corner, candy shops, card shops. I mean, I remember first looking for a newspaper. It's like, hey, where can I get a newspaper? Is there a card shop somewhere by? Oh, no. Here we have newspapers in the grocery store. Oh, what about a liquor store? Oh, no. We have liquor at the grocery store. So, it takes about a year to kind of get your sea legs, just because things are different. Now, today, 2024, I mean, it's pretty much the same everywhere around the United States. So,
well, it makes you feel better. When I first moved to California, I thought it was kind of odd when I found out that there's not exactly a liquor store. They sold liquor in the grocery store. So that was new to me too.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah, very strange. But anyway, here it is. So, that's how I got started. So I needed a job. I went out, looked for a job, went through a bunch of interviews for a company that sold high school and college class jewelry, and took the job. And, at the time it was $19,600, 1981. Wow. Okay. Sounded pretty good. Took the job, went to Indianapolis, Indiana for a training class. That was the second time I was on an airplane in my life to go to training. Went through the training, and towards the end of the training, I'd learned a few things that were a little bit strange. One kind of irked me a bit was, why did I need to give 50% of my commissions to the salesperson who used to have the territory?
Wow. Okay.
And I thought that was a little odd, In addition, if you needed to do drawings and get help from the corporation to pitch your deal, right, to pitch to the students and the faculty at the school, they would charge you for the work they were doing and put it on your draw account. So those are the two. Everything else was cool, great, nice products and all that other stuff. But it was very odd to me. Like, why are you taxing me to be able to produce work that I need to show to make a sale Like, why am I, why is that costing me money? And then why am I giving 50% of my commissions away? So towards graduation, when the president of the company came in to give his little talk, as we all do, any questions? So I raised my hand. I asked the question, what was the philosophy behind some of these practices? It was an innocuous question. I was just curious, right?
Right.
I thought it was odd. And the gentleman did not answer my question at all. He just completely avoided answering the question. And I raised my hand again and I said, with all due respect, you didn't really answer my question. And then he didn't answer it again. And then at the break, I got tapped on the shoulder, walked outside, handed a plane ticket and a check, and I was fired. And that was the start of my career.
Awesome.
So,
great way to get started.
and the point is, the reason to tell the silly story, and I've told it many times, is because it shaped my philosophy. And I made a decision at the time. And I said, if I'm ever in a position of authority where I'm leading people, I'm going to be 100% transparent. I'm going to be an open book. If people have a question, I'm going to give them the answer to the question.
It's funny you mentioned that. Again, I don't want to skip over it, but one thing I did notice when I listened into some, investor calls and learned about you over these is that that did strike me about you, where I was like, wow, this is a very transparent CEO, which we often don't see in our industry. I think that a lot of CEOs in the industry, for their own reasons, have a mask on, right? They have this sort of like facade on. And I remember I can't remember what it was, but I listened to something, some investor call a long time ago. And I remember thinking, I was like, wow, this guy's like pretty direct, So
part of it is the New York upbringing, right? Part of it is just that,
what borough in New York?
I grew up in Queens.
Okay, got it.
And, so I think it's a New Yorker kind of a New York style, right? The people are direct, but you're not going to find better friends, you know what I mean? Once people get to know you and all that. But look, I only have one way of being. You ask me a question, I'm going to tell you what I think. And I'm not going to put it in corporate speak. I'm just going to speak in plain English. And that's just who I am. Take it or leave it, So maybe not everybody's cup of tea. And you mentioned it in the context of investor relations or investor conversations or meeting with institutional investors at conferences or quarterly calls or whatever. And I think that, there were quite a number of these fund managers who really appreciated my style and thought it was fun. And they got to ask a question, they got an answer. And there were a handful that thought I was a little loose, but
not everybody's cup of tea.
Exactly. That's just the way it is. You got to be yourself. Being authentic is important. It's important to be true to yourself, and it's important for other people to know who you are.
So going back to, you just got fired.
Yeah.
What do you do next?
Yeah, right. Well, this is going to come as a surprise to a lot of folks today because I actually picked up the newspaper. That thing that, has ink on it, and that's where that's where the want ads were.
Job section. Yeah.
Right. There was actually a
I'm
section.
actually, believe it or not, I'm old enough to actually remember.
You know that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I literally picked up the newspaper and, I started, looking at stuff that sounded interesting and running around going on interviews. And the headline that caught me was Sales by Air. Now, twice I've already mentioned to you, the first time I was on an airplane was to fly to California, second time to training, third time after I got fired, come back to California. So the idea of a headline, Sales by Air, I thought, what's this about? I had never been anywhere. My parents didn't have any money. I didn't grow up with any money. And so I thought, okay. And what was it? It was selling consumer electronics to physicians at medical trade shows. And I thought, this sounds like a hell of a cool job. So I went.
You would sell consumer products to physicians at a trade show.
At a medical trade show.
At a medical trade show.
Yeah.
So not medical device, but you're selling consumer, like what kind of consumer products?
At the time, this is early 80s now. So, dictators, automatic dialers. How about this one? How about the first cordless telephone? A cordless telephone.
I remember this. And the reason why is because my father was a physician.
Yeah.
In the 80s. So I remember like the dictation machine.
Yeah.
I remember the first time he got a cordless phone. It was like a huge deal.
Yeah. I used to sell it on the basis of, and particularly back in the day, docs would bring their spouses many times many times, right? And you don't see that much anymore these days, but they would bring their spouses. And how I would sell it is if I saw the doc walking down the aisle with the wife, I'd grab him and grab the wife, and then I would tell him a story. You know, I'm selling consumer electronics. Well, they're in my booth, 8x10 booth. And I would say, do you have a pool? Because statistically proven, most physicians have a pool. Mm-hmm. And then I would say, when the phone rings in the house, to the wife, I'd say this too, who's it for? It's always for the doctor, right? Yes, of course. Then what? Well, now he's got to come out from the pool and he's going to drip water on your nice new carpet and so on and so forth. I said, you know, it's a problem, isn't it? Oh yeah, it's really, yeah. And then they, you know, they go off, tell you their little story. And I say, I have a solution to your problem. It's called a cordless phone. And I would grab it, hand it to them. And I would say, when it rings in the house, it rings 300 feet, up to 300 feet away. Voila. And, you know, you could get it at the show, order it. You weren't getting it physically, but you'd get shipped to you, and you would, you know, get a special deal, so to speak.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you feel like when it comes to
That was
good?
fun.
No, when it comes to good, you know, I think the best salespeople know how to listen and tell really good stories and be persuasive. Do you feel like that the lesson there is that not only to be able to tell a good story, but you sold around a pain point versus selling like features and like this is all the good things you could do. You focused on a very real pain point that they experienced.
Well, I mean, you know, if we get into, you know, the philosophy of sales, right? I mean, if you can identify something that you can solve through the product or service that you're providing, your chance of selling more is higher. I mean, that's just the fact. So that's kind of how, you know, I kind of worked it. Now, other things were maybe not as much fun, you know, like a dictator, you know, I mean, they needed that as kind of a business tool. An automatic dialer, that's cool, could save you some time, you know, things like that. People are like, what's an automatic dialer, right? But in any event, but I think that's important. You have to be a good storyteller, and you have to ask the right questions and so forth. So you want to, you know, have that dialogue. And I think that the best salespeople, they kind of do that. And for me, this job was great because imagine straight commission. Mm-hmm. I needed to eat. And man, I was pitching all day long. And then you'd work a show for 3 or 4 days and you'd fly to the next city. And so for almost 2 years, I spent probably 25 days a month on the road. I went all over the United States. So instead of never having been on an airplane, now I'm everywhere. And I traveled all over. It was fun. It was fun. But, you know, you had to eat what you kill. And, you know, 10% commission. And then how I got in the medical business, which will be your next question, is I happened to be exhibiting across from an entrepreneur, and he had a ambulatory ECG device, in other words, you're recording electrical activity of the heart, and it was being recorded with an ECG circuit, an analog ECG circuit attached to the back of a standard tape recorder. So, and it had electrodes. And the patient would go out, and when they felt if they had a symptom, they would press the button and it would record the actual symptom in analog. And then you would play it back with an A to D converter through an electrocardiograph, and you could see the actual strip. That was the product. What was cool about it was $2,500, but there was reimbursements. I learned about that concept way early. And docs could make a couple $100 for every time they put it on a patient. Wasn't very expensive, and they got reimbursed. So it was a pretty cool product to sell. And what got me, when he pitched me on the product, I said, how much are you going to pay? And he said, $800 a sale. I was making 10%. So if I sold something for $2,500, I made $250. This guy wants to pay me $800. I'm thinking, I'm your man. And I was the first salesperson that he hired, this entrepreneur. And that's how I got started in the business. And then a couple of years after the first year, where I sold probably 2 or 3 times what he had sold in his, you know, couple of years prior, I said, you know, I have a couple of gentlemen that I used to work with that pretty damn good salespeople. You wouldn't mind if I hired them? He goes, well, what's it going to cost me? I said, nothing. I'll pay them out of my commission. And
Fascinating.
then, right. And so at 24 years old, I went out and hired probably 30 or 40 guys, gals around the country. And, you know, they sold the product. I took a cut, and they made the rest, and we built a sales force that way. So it was pretty entrepreneurial approach. And then we actually, back in the mid 80s, you could take a company public by raising, as little as $15 million. I mean, there were real small IPOs being done back in the day. And we took the company public, actually. So I got exposed to Wall Street also. At 24 years old, I was the VP of Sales and Marketing. Now, granted, I had been the first salesperson too. So that's how I got started. So a little bit of a street smart, entrepreneurial sense, and hungry.
I want to go back because it's very interesting. What was going through your head the day that you had the idea of saying, oh, let me hire some other salespeople and I'm just going to pay them out of my commission? Because especially at a young age, even if you find the most sophisticated salesperson now, most people would not do that. What were you thinking back then that made you say, that sounds like a good idea to do?
It seemed to me an easy bet to make because the first gentleman that I hired had worked with me in the booth on straight commission. And I watched that guy for a whole year, lifting credit cards out of doctors' wallets. So I knew he could sell. And I saw no risk. And I knew that the entrepreneur wasn't in a position to be advancing people money and paying salaries and providing benefits and things like that, right? Because it was a small company at the time. So it just seemed the logical approach. And, you got to take some risks and you got to be creative. So
interesting. So after, this experience of like going from, selling consumer products to, this role, VP of sales, now you're paying out salespeople, you did a lot and then you took the company public. How did you leverage that on to your next gig? And if you can kind of give us like sort of a glimpse of your career, because, especially for those, the reason why I asked about this is, as we mentioned, we talked about it offline was, on your LinkedIn, the very last role that I found of yours was like chairman CEO over at Cardiac Science. Yeah, for Zoll, which was like, I was like, great, but that's definitely not where you started. So how did you leverage that up?
Well, that would have been, I think you probably saw 1996 maybe.
Yes.
So, I'd been at it for, 12, 14 years prior to that and did a number of different things. But it's nothing stays the same over time. I got involved with a gentleman who was had been developing what's called a Holter monitor. Now, this is instead of an event recorder, this is a 24-hour ambulatory ECG recording, and technology has now moved forward, so now it's digital. Okay. So anyway, I work with this gentleman. He was the developer. I was the distributor of the product. Okay. And it worked out really well, made some money. Everything was great. And then unfortunately, there was an intellectual property issue and was not going to have access to that product line. So nice little gig. Traveled around the world. This was my experience for setting up distributors internationally. So I got a chance to travel around the world in the early 90s and doing all that. So that was a good experience also to be not just in the US, but, to be out and about. It was great, but it kind of came to an end because of this problem. And that's why I say, nothing lasts forever, right? There's always something. And then how I met what was left of Cardiac Science at the time was a colleague, actually a recruiter colleague, I shouldn't say colleague, but a recruiter friend, said, hey, Ray, by the way, I was talking to this company. It's down the street from where you are in Irvine. They got some cool technology in the area of cardiology. The company's in really bad shape. It's down to one person. Or two people at the time.
That's bad.
But you may want to go, pop in and see what they're up to. So that was interesting. So I walk in, turns out there's two gentlemen, technologists. It was a publicly traded company with a great name, Cardiac Science, public with a stock symbol DFIB, DFib. Okay. And they had developed the ability to monitor electrocardiograph signals, monitor your heart, and then identify the onset of a life-threatening arrhythmia, and then to actually provide a defibrillation shock if that's what was necessary. They had developed that technology. Okay, so pretty cool. But the company was in boxes. It was out of money. It had a $1 million market cap at the time. It was basically dead. Right? You got two dudes, no money in the company, one board member. But I thought, this is really interesting technology. And as I mentioned, I've been now working in the field for a while, so I understand, what's involved there. Defibrillation's yet something different, but the underlying technology made sense to me. And I basically said, look, tell you what, to the remaining board member, I'll come in, I'll take over the company. We'll name me CEO. I'll raise the capital that's necessary to make something of this. And if it doesn't work out, you can have it back. Okay?
I love that.
So, I was pretty ballsy at the time, but nothing to lose, right? And
there's nothing, you can only go
Right.
up, down $1 million, down to one person. Like how much worse is it going to get?
Exactly. And this was my first opportunity to be the number one person, the chief executive officer, and so on and so forth.
That was a key inflection.
But I created that for myself, right? You know what I mean? As opposed to somebody hiring me to do that job. It was still an entrepreneurial situation, and turned out to be, pretty good experience. We got into, pivoted a couple of times because the original idea was a wearable defibrillator for individuals who were at risk of having a cardiac arrest or had congestive heart failure, and they could get out of the hospital sooner by wearing this device for a few months, and it would detect the signal and defibrillate if the person had a life-threatening arrhythmia. And I thought, man, this is pretty interesting, but man, that's going to be hard to create adoption for, and not know so much to develop the product. That didn't seem insurmountable, but the whole idea, right, of trying to create a new category in my first gig. So I licensed the patent, the seminal patent in that field. I licensed it to a company that became Zoll Medical. Okay. I'm going to tie this story together in a minute. And instead went in the direction of public access defibrillators, which if you go back to 2000, 25 years ago now, they were not ubiquitous as they are today. Today, about 500,000 devices are deployed every year in America. Huge. They're everywhere. But at the time, it was, a really interesting new concept, but makes sense, right? I mean, if somebody has a life-threatening arrhythmia and they're on the ground and they're unconscious and they're not breathing and their heart's, in tachycardia or fibrillation, if you don't defibrillate that person, then for every minute that goes by, their chance of survival goes down 10%. And the older you are, the less time you have. The younger you are, you have, you can, if you can get to somebody who's younger, still has a viable heart, and you can get to them in 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, you can bring them back from the dead. So anyway, that was a great deal. We developed the product. I bought another company that we combined, and
what was the other company that you bought?
We had the software technology. They had some hardware technology to facilitate it. So we put the two companies together so that we could facilitate the development of the product, and then launch the product. And then in 2000, the dates sometimes escape me, but in 2012, we were named the 4th fastest growing company in North America.
Wow.
So, man, it was a pretty cool success.
To go from like one to two people, $1 million, like just, sort of.
Yeah. And we had
life support,
a market cap was, a couple $100 million.
That's a great.
Now raising the money was not easy. Let me tell you that. That was a really, really difficult.
Yeah. So why, with your initial investors, what was the story that you told them that persuaded them to say, yeah, like we should put some money into this?
Well, I mean, I think the promise. I mean, the thing that everyone who wants to, grow a business, develop a product and all that, you need two things to start with. One, you got to have a big story. And I define a big story as a total addressable market that is substantial. Okay. It can't be some incremental this or that. It has to be a big story with a big untapped market, right? So that's your TAM, right? Total addressable market. So you need the story, and then you need experienced and good storytellers. Okay. Now you may not be an experienced storyteller at first, but you better be good at telling stories. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to paint the picture, paint the vision to get the investment capital that you need. So we had both. I mean, i.e., a big market, untapped potential, and confidence, right? Maybe not based on actual stuff, but being confident about the future and enrolling people in the vision, and that's how it happened. But it was hard. It was hard. I mean, that first few $1 million was took effort.
How many because we always hear from founders who are like, it's so hard for me to raise money, blah, blah. I was like, well, how many people have you pitched? Like, well, about like 10 or 20. I'm like, no. Yeah. How many people did you pitch?
Probably 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50.
Just because you don't have a first couple mil.
Well, you don't have a track record. You know what I mean, and that's where it becomes challenging, right? You can't point to some other successes that you had to give confidence to the investor, right? So that's the challenge. So now, once again, if I kind of tie all these things together, which is why when I talk to entrepreneurs today, I see if they haven't done it before and they don't have that track record of raising capital and having successful exit or whatever the case might be, or growing a successful ice cream stand, for lack of better terminology, then you better find somebody, and I always make a joke, that looks like me with a little gray hair and some scars on their back, who has a track record, who can help you. Get that person in. They'll help you. They can be a mentor. They can sit on your board. They can introduce you to people they know, and on and on and on. And it's really important, because let's face it, in this world, money does flow to people who've proven that they can make money for their partners. I mean, that's, if somebody's done it before, it's a lot easier to make that bet than first timers. So
absolutely. Now, after cardiac science, having that success, you served on a variety of different boards. You had different CEO roles. At that point in your career, when Axonics rolled around, you could have technically gone to a lot of different companies, done a lot of different things. What was it about the Axonics story that caught your attention? How were you first approached? Like, why there?
Well, I have never worked for a large company. Never. No interest.
That makes the two of us.
Okay.
I
mean, look, I'm not great at taking direction.
I'm going to start saying that myself. I like that.
You
That's
like that
more
line?
diplomatic. Yeah. What I was told? I was once told, like, oh, Omar, because my thing is like, I can't work for a big company. I've always been a startup guy.
Right.
Someone said like, oh, you startup guys, you're just not very good at getting along with other people. I'm like, that's kind of true. Cause like, if I'm in a room and I think something's a terrible idea, I can't be diplomatic about it. And you don't have time to be, right?
There's a great book with a phenomenal title called Surrounded by Idiots. And it's unfortunately, what a lot of us say, when people don't agree with us, or they don't think the way we do, they don't act the way we do. So it's like, oh, that person's an idiot, right? But the book is really about helping you identify kind of who you really are of the main personality types, and then understanding who you are, and then how can you temper that in such a way that you can get along with the other people and get them to do what you need them to do. Okay. And to drop that, you're confused, you're an idiot, or you're confusing me with somebody who really cares. I mean, that's not going to get you far in your career, in your life. Okay. So in any event, but, you got to know yourself. Okay. And bureaucracy is not my thing. And, being in a lot of meetings is not my thing, and so forth. So, in the end, you got to make decisions. Okay. And you can't do paralysis by analysis, right? And too many people with too many opinions and without anybody really being knighted to make the call
Right.
It means things don't move forward quickly. Okay. So in any event, so I, was try to be as creative as an entrepreneur as one could, take some risks. I mean, look, I've been broke in my life, dead broke. So it's never, it's not been like everything is champagne and roses from day one, right? It's been a lot of struggles, a lot of scars in the back, a lot of lessons learned over the years. But the entrepreneurial bent has always been at the fore. Always felt like I could create. I'm going to say this is going to sound funny, but I can create the future from the future. Okay.
Tell me what that means.
Yeah. Well, it's the idea that, look, the past is the past. You can't do anything about it. It's perfect by definition because you can't change it. There's lessons you can learn from the past, but you can't dwell on the past. Everything happens as you're thinking about what do I want to do here? What do we want to accomplish? What is the vision? What's the goal? What is that future look like? If I could make it up, what does that look like? What does that feel like? Okay, now when I know that, then it's like, who else do I need to help me realize that vision? And then you go through an enrollment exercise. I'm using that word very specifically to bring people in and to get them to be part of the vision, part of the team, to be able to execute on that big picture. But you know what I mean? You really gotta kind of put the hairy goals out there and, paint the picture for people. And then that's I found that really works. It's a little foofy, but in the end, people may say it in a different way, a little more corporate speak or whatever. But I really believe that that's the case.
No, I agree with you. I mean, because I think at the end of the day, if you let's face it, I think the media and what you see on TV and shows like Startups, it's all fun and exciting. It's like really brutal. It's like very, very brutal.
Super hard work. I mean, if you're not prepared, here's another thing that everybody wants to be successful. Okay, we're all capitalists. We live here in America. Everybody wants to be successful. But what I have found is that it is rare to find people that are willing to do what it takes to be successful.
Yeah.
Okay. People say, "Oh, Ray, oh yeah, you're lucky you're that." No, man. I was breaking rocks in the desert for 40 years. Okay. That's hard work, working 70 hours a week and doing all, it's people think, CEOs or people are, they're skating. No, they're not skating. Yeah, you work for, a $20 billion company, $100 billion company. Yeah, maybe you're not working 70 hours a week. But if you're, a startup person and you're trying to make something, you're going to need to put the time in and put the effort in. So, and it all comes down to bringing the right people. So if you're creating something and you're speaking it out loud, amazing how you can make it true, but you do need other people to help you. Right? We can't do it. Nobody can accomplish any of these things by themselves. So people are the key to this. But if you're in motion, I have found that people show up for you. They just show up. Okay. Now you've got to be smart enough to be able to recognize, oh, wait a minute. This person has got this skill set and I like this individual. I can plug them in. They can become part of the team to help me, accomplish this objective. Okay. So I have found in my life, and I just turned 65, by the way.
Congratulations.
Year. Yes, I made it. Tried to kill myself numerous times, but the point is I made it. The point is that I never, I don't remember actually ever working for any, like, in other words, getting hired, like, you know what I mean? In the last 3 decades, I kind of created opportunities, created the job, right? And then, brought people together as opposed to being hired, like, hey, Omar, you want to come be a sales manager for my company, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. You took a very entrepreneurial approach. I think it all started like back when you were at that trade show, you saw this opportunity, took it and said, hey, like, let me recruit more salespeople, pay them myself.
It's a path, right? It's a path, right? And some people are, that's what gets them up in the morning and others, no. Security. People think you work for a large company, you got security. That's not true. Okay. When large companies do layoffs or reductions in forces, they're indiscriminate.
Right.
Okay. So just because you work for a large company doesn't mean you're going to have, guaranteed employment for life, right? That's not the case. Not anymore anyway. So anyway.
So having all these different opportunities in front of everything, like what was it?
Okay.
What was it about Axonics that made you say?
I got to go back one back. I got to go.
Oh
back
yeah, go
one.
back.
Got to go back one,
Please.
Because prior to Axonics, there was a failed company, and a venture capital guy who owned the majority of this company that had failed its endpoint, asked me to go into the company, explain to the founder and CEO that he was no longer welcome. That was the request. Take care of that little problem. Okay. So we did that. And then take a couple of months and tell me, should we shut this thing down or is there something that can be done with it? All right. So, and without getting into all the details of what the product was and this and that and the other thing, the point is, went out, talked to a number of physicians and said, here's the core technology the company has. What do you think could be used for? Because it had failed its endpoint on the initial clinical indication, which was removing arterial schmutz in your peripheral arteries. Okay. It had failed its endpoint in the study. But there was an RF generator. There was some interesting technology, what to do with it. And as I went around with a gentleman who ultimately became my partner in crime, who was the CFO at the time, a gentleman named Dan Deeren, we gathered feedback from these docs. And one of the docs said, you've got this RF generator. There's this Australian company that is actually taking a catheter, sticking it in the renal artery, energizing the artery and down regulating the nerves surrounding the artery and reducing blood pressure, called renal denervation. Okay.
Yep.
And, you might be able to kind of, change the product around, and maybe that's something that would be interesting. There was some other ideas that came up as well. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. That sounds like a really cool idea. So we pivoted the company, took in $25 million in venture capital to pursue renal denervation. As we're pursuing it, Medtronic buys the original company who came up with the first idea.
I remember that.
Okay.
Yes.
Paid a handsome sum for the company. And I thought, oh man, did I pick a winner here? Gathered my team from cardiac science is going to be a theme now. So the technical team came over and we went to work developing the product, developed the product in 1 year's time because we had the base. So there was a lot to do, but once again, we had a base. Ran a clinical study in Europe, which is the way you would do things 12 years ago. You go to Europe first. Results were great. And sold the company to Boston Scientific for was about $225 million in less than 2 years.
That's amazing.
Right. So now, you know what I mean?
I'm sure your investor friend was pretty grateful to you.
Right. I mean, so, okay. And a couple of new people, new funds in the deal. So that's a pretty return on invested capital is the key. Whether it's private equity or it's venture capital, they're happy to put money in, but they want it back out with a nice return. Could be modest 3 times the amount of capital. If it's 5 times, that's great. If it's 10 times,
it's such a short timeline, and it doesn't sound like you went through any dilution.
But that's the point. Is that it's the return on invested capital in the time associated with that, right?
Yeah.
So in this case,
that's not a med device timeline.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Which is phenomenal.
Right. Usually, you're talking about 10-year projects at least, right? So this was pretty quick. So we got that done. That was November 2012. Okay. And company got sold. And then it was kind of like, okay, now at the time, 12, I would have been 50, 55, close to 55 years old at the time. And I'm like, all right, what's next? I mean, it made some money, but, wasn't enough to say, oh, I never have to work another day in my life and all that. I was, having been a CEO of a publicly traded company before, having, done this other deal where, we took technology and flipped it. I spent a lot of time reading analyst reports and really paying attention to what's going on in the industry. And I became convinced that neurostimulation was neurostimulation was a therapy and a technology whose time had come. And in 2013, I was pretty geeked up on the whole concept. Now, it turned out here we are now 11, 12 years later, and neurostimulation is a big deal, and we can talk about that. But so this colleague that I mentioned to you that we went around trying to figure out what to do with this company and pivoted and made renal denervation and sold it, this gentleman named Dan Darren. So he and I and another gentleman, the technologist, we founded the company. We started the company from whole cloth, licensed a patent in, which was cool, and got the company started. That was late 2013. And then went around, raised some capital, and raised $32 million in a Series A in March of 2014. But at that point, I'd been around a bit, ran a successful public company, moved that on, took something out of a garbage can, turned that into success. So I was able to invite investors to invest. So I only pitched 5 firms, 4 of them invested. And we raised 32 million, which is an important point because it's enough capital to be able to supercharge the development effort and bring the people you need to be able to do the work. So raised that capital. That was March of 14, and then brought all my former colleagues now, technical ones, that had been in the previous 2 companies. So there's a theme here. Okay. So, about 40 individuals. Okay, all here in Southern California, pretty much, based in Irvine and surrounds, and was able to bring those folks together. I got 10 beer story to tell about all that, but yet that's how we got the damn thing started, and then raised $114 million between March of 14 and March of 2018. So put a bunch of capital in the company. Was never focused on dilution, not worried about dilution. My silly comment is, you create a value in a company, even if you have 1 or 2% of a couple $1 billion company, that's real money, So people get hung up, entrepreneurs always get hung up on dilution, and, they seem to think that's the most important thing. No, the most important thing is raise the capital you need, give the shares to the investors, and go fast and get your stuff done. You got to get it done. Time kills all deals. The longer it takes, the worse it is, and you're going to burn the money along the way. So you got to go fast.
When did things really start taking off for you guys? I feel like, at least from what I read, it seemed like around 2019, 2020, we first got FDA clearance for the device and started going commercial.
Yeah. So we, once again, good team, built a great product.
And by the way, for the listeners who are just learning about Axonics, like what?
What is it?
Yeah. Okay. What is? Yeah.
Okay. So at the core, Axonics developed an implantable neurostimulator to treat urinary urge incontinence. This is for folks who have urgency. They go to the bathroom rather often, and sometimes they can't get to the bathroom in time and they leak. Sometimes it's a flood. Okay. This is very debilitating. And I would dare say that about 20 million people in America have this problem, and 95% of them are women, or 90% are women. So this is a woman's problem primarily. And so we developed a long-lived device that was easy to interface with for people, because you're going to wear, this thing is implanted in your body. It was a lead, comes out of the device and was placed near the sacral nerve in your pelvic area, and then it would modulate the communication between the bladder and the brain, and this communication would then normalize this notion of urination. And unfortunately, about a third of the people who have this problem also have bowel dysfunction that goes along with it. So sometimes they leak from both ends. That's horrible. The quality of life of these folks is terrible. And this is not an obscure problem. This is not a problem for 75 and 85-year-olds exclusively at all. The average patient we treated was 57 years old. To be average at 57 means you got a lot of younger people in that mix too,
Sure.
as well as the Medicare
And you said there's about 20 million just in the United States alone.
Correct, with that particular problem. Cool. And so that's kind of what we got started. Now because this approach that was taken was not to create a brand new category, but to be a fast follower, in this case to Medtronic, who'd had a monopoly in the field for 20 years.
And they were the main player because that's
the only player.
Yeah.
Only player.
That was the new, that's how I first found out about you guys. I think back in 19 or 20 was that once you got the FDA clearance, it was kind of like Medtronic actually has like a formidable opponent in it, which for me, I was excited about because I feel like once there's more competition, it pushes innovations. And at the end of the day, patients benefit.
No doubt.
You don't want one company.
Competition is critical for innovation to move the game forward, right? You have to have competition. I mean, Medtronic had absolutely no incentive to invest in improving their product because they owned the market. They just cash cowed it. Now, I don't think that's right. It's not in my view, but nevertheless, it created an opportunity. We saw that. Their device only lasted 3 to 5 years in the body. Then you had to explant it because the battery would run out, throw it away. And if you want to continue with the therapy, you had to get another procedure.
And it was a large device, wasn't it?
It was in terms of the form factor, you're talking about something, I'm just put in perspective. It's, let's say 20 cc's in terms of its size in volume. And so, it's kind of big. Not as big as a pacemaker, but close to it. Okay. And this is going to go in your upper buttocks. That's where the device gets implanted. So, but you can see they had a short-lived device, and they also hadn't done the testing to prove that you could go get an MRI and to be safe in an MRI environment. And so if you need an MRI, you had to get the device explanted as well. So this is not a great problem. Not a great embodiment, right? Not a great embodiment, but it was the only thing that was there. And if you're suffering, I mean, I don't care if you got pain or you can't get to the bathroom in time, you're going to do what you need to do. So that was the state of the state, but there was reimbursement in place, and they had sold, about $500 million of revenue annualized is what the situation was when we entered the business. Okay, got full reimbursement. We got one competitor. You got a market. Now the total addressable market, I mean, is billions and billions of dollars, and they were only capturing 500 million annualized. So we saw that as a big opportunity. So, you had everything lined up, right? If you could build a better embodiment, so that's key, right? You can't just copy and have something that's not significantly better than the incumbent. So we created a rechargeable device so that it could last in the body for 20 years. Okay. And it was about a fifth of the size of theirs. And it was MRI compatible.
So you really focus on what's going to be best and convenient for the patient. The patient experience was like,
I could spend an hour just talking about what we did to be able to get smart about the patient experience and to learn about it and to do the work to get that feedback, which then went into developing the product. But you got to have a embodiment that is significantly better than your competition. Otherwise, what are you up to, right? I mean, why would somebody buy from a company that nobody's ever heard of?
Right.
Versus the largest medical device company on the planet. Well, you better have something that's significantly better. So we, did the work, developed the product, ran our first clinical study, got good results. Once again, we had plenty of capital to be able to do what we needed to do. And then in 2018, how do I say this? we decided to take the company public with no revenue, and we didn't have FDA approval. But we had then, by that point, run our pivotal clinical study under an approved investigational device exemption from the FDA, and we had data. So we had 3-month data. 6 months was the endpoint. So I was able to go out to the public market, right? And I got a market that's real, it's tangible. I got one competitor. Reimbursement is generic, so I don't have to fight that battle. And I've got a device that's going to last long and is going to be, much better, for the patient. So check. Good. Is there a good story? Well, damn, the market is untapped and it's huge. All these people suffering in silence out there. And what about the storytellers? Oh, well, wait a minute. These folks seem to have done some things before. They seem to know something about, how to develop products and how to market the products. Now, what was unique about it is it's the first company that anybody can remember that's in devices, not pharma, that was able to go public without FDA approval and without any revenue.
And I want to ask you, why did you decide to do that?
Capital, access to capital. Once you raise over $100 million in venture capital, it gets much more challenging because the valuation's higher, on and on and on. So, there's a certain period of time where if you really want to, if you're going to need access to a lot more capital, getting it out of the public market is the way to go.
So once you go to the public markets, at that point, to amplify that story to the public market is going to be more important, which means that you really poke the bear. In this case, being Medtronic.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think the other thing, which was use of proceeds, is a typical question that well, what are you going to do with the money? Because an IPO in this era, they're $125, $150 million, right? So you're going to raise a substantial amount of money.
Pre-COVID IPOs, those are good times.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, thankfully, it's going to happen again, and it's started already. So we're going to be back on the horse in our industry. So in any event, it's really about access to capital, but you have to have a certain mindset. You have to really enjoy pitching the story. You have to enjoy spending time and bantering with these fund managers. What we did, which was back to the use of proceeds comment I made, people would ask us and I'd say, well, okay, we're going to get approval in about a year, right? By the time we, work through the process of review and filing and all that. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to take this money and we're going to hire 100 salespeople. And they're going to be ready to rock and roll. So the day that we get FDA approval, 100 reps are going to enter the field to compete against Medtronic. And that's what we did. And some people said, you're out of your bloody mind. It wasn't the first time I've heard that, of course. It's a consistent theme. And it's like, well, how else do you sell stuff if you don't have the feet on the street? You need the feet on the street. So we paid literally, no exaggeration, in 2019, we paid reps $20,000 a month to train. That was their guaranteed income. We raised the money, we put the money to good use, and we trained the hell out of those folks. And man, when that bell rang, we were ready to go, which is why we were able to sell in our first quarter, which was attenuated by COVID, $26 million of product was sold in the first quarter. And it would have been a lot more because we had demand for higher numbers, but COVID hit and we couldn't even fill
And you guys did really well in 2023. I think your 2023 revenue was like 335 million.
I mean, the first year, we did $111.5 million.
Great first year number.
In 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic. So we talk about a year, but it wasn't a year. I mean, you could say maybe we had
like 7 months,
8 months at max, you know? So we got off to a fantastic start and then grew the hell out of the business, subsequently from there, such that we were ranked in, let me get my dates right, 2021, 2022 period. Axonics was ranked the fastest growing company in the Americas. Not that Mexico and Canada were a lot of competition, but how cool is that, right? I mean, the number one, that's not too shabby, the number one fast growing company in America. Now, because we started from nothing and ramped it up really quickly. Now, as we exit here in 2024, this is a company that's annualized at $500 million. All right. So not too shabby in, 4.5 going on 5 years. So a phenomenal success. But if we hadn't invested in hiring those salespeople and getting a fast start, the story would be very, very different.
So your first thought, I guess, strategic approach here was that you're going against a incumbent that had practically a monopoly on the market.
No, a monopoly.
A monopoly, right? Okay, you're right. A monopoly. And so your thing is that because a lot of times when you think about commercial launches, people, they hire like, a handful of reps.
That's right.
They're like, we'll kind of scale. Your thing was, we got one shot and we need to just decimate the market and really start taking as much market share as possible, as quickly as possible.
And then start working on growing the market.
And it
working on growing the market, right?
Because it wasn't too long later when, the legal battle started happening with Medtronic, right?
Well, so look, they were rather insulted that we broke up their monopoly. Okay. They were insulted. How dare we? Okay. So what they did is they filed an intellectual property lawsuit against us a couple of days after we treated our first commercial patient.
Wow.
A couple of days. And they asserted 7 patents against us and so on and so forth. So, this is the page 38 of the big company playbook. When you get a competitor in the field,
I read that page, yeah.
Right. You make up some shit and you sue them for IP, patent infringement, and you basically distract the management. You get them to spend money, on and
they try and bleach up. But you guys ended up weathering that and winning. But like at that time, you mentioned at the very beginning of the interview the importance of people.
Yeah.
What's the culture like, and what's the alignment that you instill internally to make sure that everybody's aligned and running towards the goal and not getting distracted? Because it's a big distraction. It's one thing to get sued. It's another thing to get sued by the largest med device company in the world. What was going on internally?
Well, I think what you have to do is you've got to be able to overly communicate with your people. See, back to this transparency, you got to overly communicate with your people. You need to, give them your confidence. Like, say, they need to hear from the CEO of the company, hey, this is all BS. Okay. We were very careful. We're not infringing on their patents. This is a strategy that they're playing. They're doing it for these reasons. We are not going to back down. We put out a news release the next morning and basically said, this is not about the merits. This is about stemming competition and a large bully trying to hold on to their monopoly. This won't stand, and we're going to fight. Mm-hmm. And we spent, as it turned out, $30 million defending ourselves over that 5-year period of time. And they were insistent, and they took it all the way to federal court in Santa Ana, California, with a jury of 9. So we went and did, literally, it was a 8-day jury trial. And in the end, we prevailed, and that was that. But I can't get that 30 million back and all the rest. So, but the point is, look, it would have been very disruptive if the folks in the company that were in the field already, right? People inside the business, you see them regularly. You can how do I say? You can relieve their fears more easily because you see them.
Yeah, of course.
But the people in the field, you don't see them every day.
And they're out there.
Yeah, and they're out there, and they're out there competing, and the competition is making up all kinds of bullshit and telling folks that telling the customers they shouldn't buy from us because they're going to get an injunction against us. You're going to have to rip these products out of people's bodies. Don't do business with Axonics. So our salespeople heard a lot of bullshit. But once again, we had hired the right people. We'd spent a lot of time with them. They understood what they were getting involved in and who we were and who was leading and so on and so forth. And we hired people that weren't scared. They were not going to back down. I mean, these are gunslingers. I hired gunslingers, man.
And by the way,
Okay.
I heard a, I don't want to call it a rumor, but it's true that like up to a certain point, like in Axonics today, when I checked on LinkedIn, they have like a little over 900 employees.
Yes.
But you interviewed like everybody.
So I would say that out of the close to 900 people that were in the company, I interviewed every customer-facing individual, and that's 500 of them. And in the early days, I interviewed everybody and anybody, because I wanted to look them in the face. I wanted to ask them questions. I wanted them to hear from me, understand what the vision was, understand how we do business, on and on and on, and have a good feeling about that. Because, the one thing, over the years is that, you learn to trust your gut, right? And it's all about people. And, I think that I, pretty good track record on picking the right people. So I think that's important. People would say to me, I was the first CEO they ever interviewed with. And others would say to me things like, how do you have time to do that?
Yeah. Because you
make it.
Yeah.
You just make the time. What's more important than the people that are going to work for your company, that are going to interface with your customers and your patients? I can't think of anything that would be more important to make sure I'm accountable in the end of the day. If you're accountable, that's big responsibility, right?
Whether it was a VP sales or a sales associate, you're interviewing.
I'm interviewing clinical specialists. I'm interviewing salespeople, sales managers, you name it.
People who, let's say, might have been turned away purely because of your intuition.
Yeah.
What did your intuition tell you?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like if you personally interviewed each of these people, because you're vetting them out because you want to make sure they fit in the company, and
Right.
you found some people who may say weren't a fit.
Sure.
What was it that, like, what did your intuition tell you? Was it like, what, they're not aggressive enough, they don't embody the values we're looking for? Like what?
It could be any one of a number of those kinds of things, right? A lot of folks in particularly in the medical arena, they get confused between what they did and what the name on the business card implied.
I 100% agree with you on
Right?
that.
So
Very
I'm
much so, yeah.
trying to find out: are you a pretender?
Mm-hmm.
Are you successful because you worked for a company with a big ass name with a lot of market share? And
Or you
all
just
the rest?
joined, or you joined when the market had so much pull. It doesn't matter what kind of salesperson you were.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you find that people who are higher up in the food chain in these companies have a tendency to take more personal credit for their success of their organizations, when in fact it's the power of the organization. It's a lot easier to be going around with a Medtronic business card. We keep talking about them, but or Johnson and Johnson or Edwards or one of the. It's a lot easier to run around with that business card than the business card that nobody's ever seen before, a company never heard of before. You got to explain who you are, why you're there, what the vision is, and what you're trying to accomplish. So, but in the end, there are some telltale signs. And look, everybody I interviewed had already been interviewed by a whole bunch of people in the company, right? They kind of. So I was kind of and they were told, look, we want to hire you, but you got to interview with the CEO, and if he doesn't agree, you're not getting hired. About 3 or 4% of the people that I interviewed, I didn't agree to hire.
At that point, you must have had like some questions that you love to ask that told you a lot. What?
I appreciate the question, and you would think that would be the case, but I just make shit up as I go along. So as we're having this conversation today, right? Okay, we're getting to know each other. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not like we prepared, right?
Definitely. No, yeah.
You see what I mean? So for me, no matter who showed up whether, first of all, it was in person in the beginning, but then after 2020, it was, we didn't do the in-person stuff for a long time. It was all Zoom and stuff like that. So, right. So when you're in person, it's a lot easier to kind of pick up stuff, right? About people. Zoom's a little more difficult to pick up, but my point is that I want to have a conversation with people. So, it was a little off-putting maybe for them in a way, because I'm like, so, hey, Omar, yeah, nice to meet you. How's it going? So where are you from? I see your interesting last name. Where are your folks from? I want to get to know the person a little bit and spend 15 or 20 minutes trying to understand, who they are. Look, there's a lot of rules, you're not supposed to ask,
Unfortunately, yes.
you're not supposed to ask this, you're not supposed to ask that. So if I can't ask you how much money you're making, I could say, what a person who might be doing a similar job in the industry or in the company you used to work for, what would that job pay? I didn't ask you how much you made, but I'm going to get the information I need.
I miss the days when you can just directly ask people questions,
but you can still get the answer. So if you say, so do you have any, this job's going to require some overnights. Is there anything that prohibits you from being able to do that? Like, do you have like a pet at home? I mean, and then what happens is people just volunteer the information.
Sure.
Well, no, it's not a problem for me. I have 2 young children, but my husband this, or my wife that, or my mom this or that. They start to tell you that no, it's not going to be a problem. I got that covered. Okay, good. Check. Because you got, you need the information, and you really can't come out and ask it directly. So, but there's ways to get people, if they're comfortable, they reveal stuff. If you got to make them comfortable first.
Sure.
So I don't, you know what I mean? So it's not about, some special question, because it was a different conversation with every single person that I talked to.
You just like to allow people to talk, and then as they gave you information and told you, then you were able to ask more questions.
Correct.
Agreed. Funny enough, that's exactly the format of my show, because a lot of people ask me, because we've done over 300 of these episodes, like, what questions you like to ask and everything. There's a couple of them, but I'm like, if you look at the best interviewers, Larry King, Cal Fussman, Walter Cronkite, they ask the questions based on what the guest is telling them. Because if you don't, and if you have your own script, then you're not paying attention to the conversation.
And the other thing is that people are generally nervous. Like, I've had that magic business card. You only one of them. Chief Executive Officer. There's only one.
The CEO magic is a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Thing.
It's the magic business card.
And you have to watch, the smallest thing that you think is insignificant could mean a lot to somebody.
Precisely. And the point is, people are going to be a little bit intimidated. And if they've never interviewed with the CEO before, then they got stuff running around their head. So my first objective, I want to make you as comfortable as possible so that you realize I'm just a regular guy. I'm an authentic, here's who I am, and I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to, I'm going to be very, what's the right word? Non-corporate in the sense of, you know what I mean? We're going to just have a conversation. Let's have a conversation, Let me learn. I want to learn a bit about you, and you can learn some things about me. And then, I'll spend some of that time also enrolling them in the vision of, here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we're doing it. Here's what's important to us. These are our values, and so on and so forth. And, here's what we expect, It's not a shift job. We're not running a shift here. Okay. This is a do what it takes to be successful job. But the key is, you've got to give people the incentive, and this is an important piece. People, they need equity in the business, and they need to have an uncapped earning potential if you're in sales. Right? We understand there's market rates for a clinical specialist job or a marketing job or an engineering job. There's market rates. Okay, but they should all have equity in the company. If people don't have ownership in the company, how are they going to really appreciate the success of the entity or care about anything other than themselves? Right? You gotta give people a reason to work as a team, right? And to be willing to support other people in the company, because we're sharing the common goal. We want to see the company be successful, and because I can see the scoreboard at the end of the quarter. I get to look on the scoreboard and say, how are we doing? And, if I got stock at, let's say you weren't fortunate enough to be there in the beginning where the stock was $1, or the options were $1. So we went public at 15. So maybe you got stock at 15 or 20 or whatever. But, you look at that scoreboard and you go, hey, we're at 42. This is pretty cool. And then, you get to go and say, hey, we can buy some new shoes for the kids, or, that silly expression. But you know what I'm saying? So it made a big difference. I mean, giving people equity and a disproportionate amount as compared to maybe what they might have seen in other places made a big difference. So my philosophy was, I want people that are flexible. They can do more than one thing at the same time, if you know what I'm getting at. Like they have ability to stretch. I'll pay them more than the market rate because I'd rather have one smart person doing this function who can do the work of 3 people, and then they can get paid 150% of what the market rate is, but I'm not hiring those extra 2 people. So if you think about Axonics and you think about revenue per employee, and you think about a company doing $500 million in revenue and has 900 people in the company and 500 of them are field-based, it starts to tell you things about the philosophy of that particular company, and you got to share the wealth. And I learned that from a early mentor of mine, who's one of my best friends in the universe. And he
Who was that?
It's a gentleman named Howard Evers. I'll be happy to say his name because my colleagues who listen to the podcast, they're like, yeah, Ray, we all love Howard, that kind of thing. And and he taught me some things early on, right? The idea of what comes first, the money or the attitude? Well, you better have the right attitude first, because that money's not coming, and you got to share the wealth. And I'm most proud of the fact that, sure, I made money in the deal, no doubt. Had an exit, did really well for myself, my family, the whole thing. So great. Make no apologies for that. Okay. You know what I mean? You start something. If it turns out to be a success, we're in America. We're entrepreneurs. We're capitalists after all, right? So it's okay if you do good with people or do good by people. And in our case, we helped a lot of people have better quality of life. I'm not talking a handful. I mean, in 2024, 125,000 people will have a better quality of life because we exist as a company. So I've kind of lost track, but you know what I mean? You got to, people are invested in the entity. It's amazing how things happen and how they're willing to help their colleagues be successful. You see what I mean? They're not standing on people's shoulders to get ahead in the sense of, I want to put you down to get ahead. I want to lift up all my colleagues because we're all in this together.
Yeah, and I love that you describe that because I feel that one common thing I hear from executives and leaders in the industry is that you have like a really successful sales rep, but they're more invested in seeing themselves succeed. They don't care so much about their peers. Correct. In this case, it's almost like the perfect, or at least you engineered the perfect type of company to attract and retain talent, which is one, for the entrepreneurs and founders listening, overpay for the talent because you're going to attract top talent.
Right.
And again, there's no, I know people are stretched on budgets and how much they've raised, but there's no getting away. Like you get what you pay for in this.
Listen, you have to have an open-ended commission plan, and you better know something about sales and marketing because you're accountable, and that's how people keep score. Okay. You can't squeeze blood out of rock, right? I mean, you got to lift it. So the point is people need to make money. And if you're in sales, you need to be able to make money. You need to be able to understand. And the commission plan, comp plan needs to be very simple. So you don't need a damn decoder ring to figure out how the hell I'm going to get paid. And what I would explain to people is like, look, here's the deal. You're going to basically earn about 10%, maybe a little more of what you sell. So you don't need a decoder ring. Okay. You go sell a few $1 million and you're going to make some money. Now we guaranteed people, $20,000 a month as a not a base, but a, salary plus draw.
Sure.
So now you got to be careful. You don't want to hire people who have the $240,000 a year curse, which means they're very comfortable living in St. Louis on $240,000. You want the people that really want to stretch and really want to go for the gold. In 2023, our top salesperson sold $9 million worth of product, made nearly $1 million, made more than I did. Now, isn't that a great story?
So phenomenal.
That's phenomenal, right? Yeah. And we had a whole bunch of other people that also made $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. Now, when you got reps making that kind of money, okay, everybody wants to work.
Word gets around the block.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, you may not be able to say this, but I would imagine that not only is there an opportunity to make more money, but technically, from what I'm hearing, you had a better product. So did you have former Medtronic employees want to come and join? Was that,
Well, we had, that was tricky because you can't,
because there's like a non-compete.
everybody has non-competes,
Yeah.
right? And so you have a 1-year non-compete. You can't hire somebody from your competitor if they have a non-compete to come work to sell your product. So we did hire people that had formerly been working in this field. A couple of jobs removed, 1 or 2 jobs removed. Then they're fair game, right? But as it turned out, it's interesting you asked this question. It's not what you might have thought, right? You think, oh, just hire from your competition, but you can't with the non-compete. So, however, along the way, we realized that of this patient population that we were treating, that of all these almost 20 million people, primarily women, who couldn't get to the bathroom in time, there's another equal number of women out there who, when they cough or sneeze or pick up an object or exercise, leak a little bit. Now, that one is a mechanical issue where their urethra and their pelvic floor is not functioning the way it really should to keep that coaptation, to keep the urine where it's supposed to be, right? So when it's under stress, they would leak a little, and you would kind of hear the oops, oops, that one. Well, that becomes pretty annoying over time, and it's typically related to childbirth. So there's a direct correlation in that condition. Okay, our technology of implanted neurostimulation doesn't treat that problem because that one's a mechanical problem, not an electrical or communication problem. So we went out and literally found a hydrogel that was highly differentiated, and they had $10 million worth of business in Europe. Small company had just gotten FDA approval. And in March 2021, for a company doing $10 million, we paid $200 million in cash. And a kicker, they wanted a kicker. So it's like, okay, if it's funny, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, what the hell was the number? But I think it was 25 or 30 million, and I don't remember, and I really should. But in any event, and they said, well, we want a kicker to do the deal. It's like, I haven't offered you something you can't refuse already, but okay, fine. What's your idea? Well, if you sell $50 million in a year, you should pay us this kicker of extra, whatever it was, 25, 30 million. So I'm thinking, shit, the total market's $25 million. I mean, sure. Okay. This year, Axonics will sell $100 million of that product. Okay. Wow. So now to tie the story together, all of a sudden now I have a non-competitive product to sell to the same customers that use sacral neuromodulation, which is the implantable device that we had. So then we hired some of those Medtronic folks who wanted out.
To sell the mechanical side.
Exactly. And 1 year, they sell what we call, the product was called Bulkamid. They would just sell Bulkamid for a year. And then when the non-compete ran out, they then have a choice. You want to continue to sell that product, or you want to go and sell sacral neuromodulation. So we did wind up with probably, let's say 12 or 15 of their best people who wanted out. They really wanted out.
What year did you launch Bulkamid?
Bulkamid was launched in 21.
So after a year, the street must have loved that story, because technically, aside from like another line of revenue, you've technically increased your own TAM.
Correct.
Right?
Doubled it.
Yeah.
Now, inexpensive product. I mean, $1,000 is what we sold the product for, whereas our implantable device is $16,000. Okay, so big difference. So when I say $100 million, that's over 100,000 patients being treated. It's an incredible number, right, of people. So that turned out to be really synergistic. It was a big stretch for us to do that deal. It was, people thought, once again, I was crazy. Well, how do you pay $200 million for a business that's doing 10 million with a total market size of 25? That was the best question I got from one of my board members. And I said, well, you need to understand the context, okay? I don't want to overpay, but this wasn't for sale. The asset wasn't for sale. And, when things are not for sale, you got to make people offers that they can't refuse. And that's how the world works. So we took a risk, took a leap, and it did a lot better than I thought. But great synergy, right? In terms of the products that we're selling,
was gonna ask about that.
many of the same patients.
So it wasn't really a distraction because it wasn't completely, it was almost like a tuck into the core.
That's right. That's exactly correct. It's exactly correct. So it turned out to be a big success, and it helped us sell more on the other side, because some of those customers had been doing business with our competitor for so many years. They just didn't, status quo was okay for them. You know what I mean? They didn't want to change things, that, whatever. So a lot of folks wouldn't listen to our message. They weren't open to having our salespeople come in there and they, we couldn't get access. So all of a sudden now I'm thinking, wait a minute, let me get this other cool product in the door.
Bulkamed was kind of like a Trojan horse.
It was the Trojan horse.
I love it. It's kind of a land and expand. We'll land with Bulkamed, expand.
You got it. Exactly. Now, you may not get that other sacral neuromodulation business at first. It may take you 6 months, may take you a year, but you play the long game. And it was because you think about this. And
you opened up a revenue channel with a customer that might have been a lost deal anyway.
Correct. That you had no business with this person. So, okay, I can get in there with Bulkamed. At least I'm behind the counter, so to speak. And then they get to see who Axonics is, the quality of our people, and all that.
I think that's something I didn't know about the story. I think it's fascinating because if you look at a pipeline for any company, there is a lot of money in lost deals, right?
Sure.
And what do you do with that? Right. And coming in with a product that satisfies a need at a much lower, cost.
Yeah.
And then just playing the long game. Because a lot of time at the end of the day, and I think this is the power of reps, is that, it's important to have great innovation product and everything. As a rep, the only thing you have that you have control of is your relationship with that customer.
That's right.
And so, at least from what I remember, Axonics had really good clinical specialists, really good people out in the field. You guys did a lot of good patient marketing.
Yep.
Right. And so was Bulkamed that, would you say, when you look at the $3.7 billion exit to Boston Scientific, could that have happened without Bulkamed?
Probably not. I mean, I think, being honest, I think probably not, because it once again, it got us so many more customers. And then what in the end, given the fact that we had some good people who could create good analytics in the company, I mean, it turned out that about 75% of all of our customers in America, and now you're talking 4,000 or 5,000 of them, were doing business with both products. It was right. The synergy was truly amazing. So, it worked out, right? It worked out. It was very risky. People kind of were like, I think you've lost your mind, but okay. But we were performing, and people gave us the benefit of the doubt, right? Which is what we needed. And it all worked out. But it's not one thing. Like, look, the other thing, what I didn't say is, yes, we had our first product was developed in 2016, and we launched in 19. But then we created 3 new versions of the rechargeable version, and then we created a version of the product which is not rechargeable, which is had a primary cell battery. And my engineers in the company, once again, had worked with some of these people for 25 years, spectacular, brilliant people, made a device that would last 20 years in the body without recharging. Now that's cool, right? So we didn't stop. We continued to invest. We continued to innovate. And what happened is the customers are like, holy shit, we've been doing with this other company who hasn't done anything to innovate in 20 years. These guys have only been around a couple of years. They just keep coming out with new stuff that's even better than what they had last week.
And every physician loves that, by the way.
100%.
They love that.
100%.
I think the one lesson that I want to point out just for a lot of the entrepreneurs who are listening is that your ability to kind of look at lost deals or customers and say, like, what else can we do to kind of get in front of it? Because once we get in front of it, if they actually give us a chance, we know that they'll convert.
But that's the point. If you have a good product, you got to get a chance. First of all, you got to get in the door. Okay, that's number one. So you need people with either relationships or, they've sold stuff in your particular field, because you got to get in the door. Okay, if I can get in the door, maybe I can win you over. But if I can't get in the door, I'm screwed. So Bulkamed really helped us expand the business and get in the door. And in the end, I mean, our margins over that span of this 5-year period went from 60% to just about 80%.
Amazing.
And
Wow.
that was not because of price. We didn't increase prices because we had competition in the field, but it was really the good work that was done here in Irvine by the manufacturing folks to be able to, let's just say, reduce cost of goods by being more efficient and things like that. But when you're approaching 80% margin now, and on some scale, I mean, you got a lot of dollars that you can invest. So one of the
great
things
EBITDA
right? You got
that.
nice EBITDA at that
Real
point.
good EBITDA.
But I'll tell you what, we didn't slow down. We never slowed down. We made the investment in people in the field, and then we said, how are we going to expand the market? How do we get the word out? It's very inefficient. If you expect to get the word out because you've got a doc who's going to talk to a patient, when in reality, physicians today, particularly in urology, spend maybe 10 minutes.
Maybe.
Yeah. So how can you communicate various different treatment options efficiently and effectively in 10 minutes? So we just said, you know what? We're never going to be able to create more adoption for this technology if people are suffering in silence and they never get to the right physician. Okay. Because not every urologist, I mean, we're talking maybe there's 20,000 of them and, 4,000 or 5,000 practice this, this kind of stuff. Right. So we just said, you know what, we're just going to go directly to consumers. And that was another leap. And so
And I noticed that, but I know some of the people that you hired in your marketing department who were doing that consumer work.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know anything about it, but the point is we figured it out. And now, give you a sense, in 2024, 4 million people will go to findrealrelief.com.
Great domain name, by the way. There's another thing that I saw a few years ago. I was like, nicely done.
That's kind of cool. And of those individuals, about 5% of them will fill out a symptom survey online and tell us who they are and how to reach them, indicating they want an appointment with a doctor. So think about that for a second. Now you're talking about 200,000 people a year who've expressed not just curiosity about the product, but they're like, I have this condition. I filled out the symptom survey. Get me with a qualified physician in my area. And that has been great as well. Now, of course, we had to invest, whatever it was, $16-18 million to get started. It was the first year investment. Now we generated a bunch of leads, but almost no sales because there's a gestation period, right? I saw something on television, a 30-second spot, or on Facebook, I was.
What was your key channel for patients that worked the best?
It was national television and Facebook.
Got it.
And Facebook's because if you type something in and you're looking at something and you happen to have incontinence, you might be looking at special panties or this or that or whatever it might be, and those people you can kind of chase them around and get them to respond. So it really worked well, and it turned out then it took some time and investment, but by year 3 of our campaign, it's returning really nice return. It's a very nice return on the invested dollars.
And I want to point out what you said on year 3.
Right.
So I think the problem with too many people these days, especially companies, is that with marketing, especially digital, they think that it's like a slot machine and they're like asking for things to happen within a quarter or two. And forget about marketing. People don't change behavior that fast either.
Well, it's look, getting everybody who's living in America today knows that our healthcare system is as broken as you can imagine. That doesn't mean I'm not insulting any of the physicians that are out there. There's a lot of brilliant physicians, but the system sucks because the insurance companies have been knighted by the United States federal government and basically take 20% of all the dollars and return it to their shareholders. Every dollar it's spent, about 20% drops to the bottom line of these insurance companies. So we've heard a lot about this recently because of the shooting of the United CEO, but just deny a prior authorization game where people are denying claims and making it difficult for people to access the treatment they need. Is not a good thing. It's not a good look in America, and it's very unfortunate. And so, it's a challenging environment. And getting physicians' time, understanding where do you go, are they in network, out of network? I mean, it's complicated for people. So we're just trying to help facilitate, getting people access to somebody who could actually help them.
And go beyond those 10 minutes.
Right.
Which I think is important to point out that like, it seems like one of the culture, or at least the value points you had, is sort of intellectual curiosity to say, okay, like, we're not going to get any more time with physicians, and for us to sort of rely purely on adoption through physicians is not going to work. We need to go directly to patients, start educating them that way.
Correct.
So it'll help physicians as well.
And you got to go deep in these accounts. So in other words, the reason why we have so many clinical specialists, and Axonics has about 250 of them around the country, right, is because the physicians have actually less to do with the uptake of the product and how many patients get treated versus the staff. It's the PAs and the NPs, right? Physician assistants, nurse practitioners, RNs that work in the practice that are the ones spending the time with the patients. And if you enroll them and you've got people that are embedded in the account, and I don't mean embedded like they go there at 8 in the morning.
No, but they're
there all the time.
Yeah, they're there. And
all the time.
I think that's important
Yeah.
because it shows like good customer success. As we kind of, finish up the interview, and I appreciate you, driving out, spending some time with me. One thing I did want to ask, a lot of the founders who are listening, when they get into those negotiations with a strategic,
Sure.
right? So I want to highlight something. We spent almost an hour and a half talking about what does it mean to build a good company.
Build a business, right?
Build a
right,
business.
yeah.
If you build a good business, the exit will happen as a good byproduct, right?
We had I never thought about the exit after we went commercial. It was not something that was in my mind.
Right.
In the back of my mind, it's like, if we get the company to positive EBITDA, higher margins, and net profit and cash flow positive, I bet you somebody's going to come
Sure.
sniffing around.
Sure.
And that's ultimately what happened.
When that happens, and again, like,
Yeah.
how do I pay? Actually, I don't think there's a diplomatic way to say this. When a strategic or somebody's coming to negotiate to buy your company,
Yes.
these aren't happy, nice conversations. They're going to try and use as much leverage to get the best price for them. And then on the other side, the founders and the management team are going to leverage to try and get the best price for their company. So what kind of advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are going to enter those? Because you can create a lot of value for your company just in the time that you negotiate.
You've got to we need context to answer the question, because if you're a private entity, it's different than if you're a public entity.
Very true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in our case, when Boston Scientific, when the discussion started, our share price was $58. Now, it had been above 70 previously, before the Mounjaro, Ozempic, the GLP-1 scare, which knocked about 15 to 20% off everybody's share price in 2023.
Yeah.
Which was part of the impetus for why I agreed to get a deal done, because I didn't want to wait for the next Black Swan event. We had already been through two. One was COVID, everybody knows about it. The second one was the GLP-1 phenomenon that hammered the shit out of all the medical device companies out there. So, we had a great year, started the year at 58, ended the year at 58, went through that whole experience. And I thought, if we could get a good number, an increase, then we should take it. So, but it's kind of prescriptive. Now, I'm public. So if another public company is going to come and buy, or even a PE group is going to come buy a public company, it's kind of in the back of the book that if you don't offer at least the 20% increase in the valuation of the company, nobody's going to vote for that. You got public shareholders. I mean, come on, the board can say yes, but you got to go to your shareholders and get them to agree. So if it's less than 20%, your deal's not getting approved, right? So it's kind of like, you can do the math. Yeah, you can, in the end, did we argue a little bit over a couple of dollars? Sure, we did, right? My job's to get the maximum I can for my employees and all our shareholders. I mean, that's my job, to make money from our partners, right? So in any event, but it wasn't. It's much trickier private. When you're a private company, you don't have a valuation that somebody can look up on the scoreboard. So now it's a little trickier. Okay. People say, well, but I have a last round post-money valuation. No, that's just some bullshit that the VCs made up. Okay. That's not real. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. They paid into your company and there's a valuation on the company, but in the end of the day, it's very squishy. So it's a little more tricky when it's private. However, when I talk to groups, I tell them the best time to sell a company is before you ship the first commercial product. Why? Because most early stage companies, when they go to commercialize, don't have the bones in the company to be super successful. And what they prove is that, this was a lot harder than they were telling people it was going to be. Adoption is coming much slower. Really, this is really hard. So, the bloom comes off that rose pretty damn quick. But if you've not commercialized, well, all that TAM is still out there. It's a beautiful rose, right? It has.
If you can tell the right story.
If you go, of course, well, yeah, I'm getting back to the guy to tell the right story. But you see what I'm saying? But it's a little trickier, okay? And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs get confused between whether they have a project or a company. Many times, if it's some incremental cool technology, sure, that should belong to somebody who's already in the game, all right? Who can really benefit from your new invention or whatever. But to start something from scratch, when I tell people what's really involved, they lose their minds. I'm like, hey, we raised, now granted it's a serious product, it's an implant, and there's real procedures being done in institutions and all that. But the point is that I lost it. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, but the point here is that it's really hard to be successful as a commercial entity when you have no other reason to be in the accounts, to be in the institutions. You got this newfangled thing. Nobody knows who the hell you are. It's really, really difficult, and everybody underestimates it. And they get confused between, I've got this widget and I think I can build a company around it. Well, maybe not. So that's the first thing you've got to ask yourself realistically. And the second thing is, who's going to be the ultimate buyer of this? I'm not saying, you need to sell it right away. The point is, who's going to ultimately be the buyer? If you can't articulate that and it doesn't make a lot of sense, chances are you're going to have some problem. Now, back to the money. I explained to people, we raised $115 million in venture capital. Okay. You're talking about, you raised 5 million and you're looking for 10, it's like, you have no idea how much more money this is going to be. There's no such thing as some great success, without raising a significant amount of money. We went public, raised whatever it was, 130, 140, whatever the IPO was. We raised in total $750 million from the public markets. All right. In addition to the 100 and change that we raised from the venture. Now, it turned out we were overcapitalized and we wound up with $350 million in the bank. But when you get your ass sued by the largest company on the planet, you want to be overcapitalized.
Sure.
Okay. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? At least, so it was annoying, but I didn't have to worry about, did we have the capital to be able to protect ourselves and defend ourselves, right? And invest in salespeople and invest in infrastructure and smart technologists and, run marketing programs. You need the capital. There's no way to do this shit in a shoestring. You need the capital. So you can't be worried about dilution as we started the conversation today. So you can see there's a lot involved, but, and if you've never raised money before, how the hell are you going to raise that? And you know what I mean? It's not about 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 million. You're going to need hundreds of millions of dollars if you want to take this thing, down the road. And it's funny that if you take a step back and you really look at these companies that are out there, that's what it's taken. You know what I mean? Or I told you a story earlier. We raised $25 million and sold it a couple of years later. That's a unicorn, man. That happens so rarely, that you can do that. But we didn't commercialize. You know what I mean?
What's your advice? What about for the entrepreneurs that are going to have to commercialize? You're going to have.
I think you better have some line of sight to some serious amount of capital that you can bring to the company. Otherwise, you're going to try to do it on a shoestring and you're going to fail.
Last note here as we wrap, and I'm wondering how you would respond to this is that based on what you're saying right now about if you have to commercialize, you got to be able to raise capital.
Yes.
I feel like this goes back to a lot of the lessons that you shared in this podcast, which is how to build a good company, because at the end of the day, I think the ability to build a good company, recruit talented people, and then very quickly start generating revenue can tell a very powerful story to somebody who says, yeah, you know what? I'm willing to put a lot of money into this thing and take a risk because like the early indications look good.
Right.
You know?
Right. Which is why you've seen now, we'll bring it to today. When I gave this talk recently, I mentioned to you at the Neurotech Leaders Forum, right? And one of the things that I did is I shared with the audience a list of 15 medical device companies that went public between 2018 and 2021 that aren't worth the capital they raised in the IPO.
Wow.
Okay? Because they weren't able to execute. Everybody looks at the big successes, Inspire Medical, neurostimulation for sleep apnea. Man, $600 million annualized revenue line, right? I mean, doing really well. Market cap, $5-6 billion, right? Axonics, great success, fast growing company, gets sold $3.7 billion. Okay, you know what? How many more can you name? You see what I mean? The big successes are rare. Lots of failures. The playing field is littered with dead bodies of companies, or the walking dead. Many of them are alive, but barely, right? Mm-hmm. So, going public is not ultimately the panacea. If you don't have all those other elements we talked about, chances are, you're not going to succeed in the public markets. You better be growing your damn company fast, and you better do it consistently, because the public markets are unforgiving. We were very fortunate. I give a lot of credit to our commercial team led by our Chief Commercial Officer, Al Ford, plug for Al. 20 commercial quarters in a row. We beat our numbers every quarter.
That's phenomenal.
And you know what? There's no other option. There is no other option. I mean, now, did we know what we were going to sell when the quarter started? No, of course not. But, we had put the quarters in the jar, right? So, you know what I mean? We're confident we could get to the finish line, but you got to beat your numbers. And when I say the numbers, I mean, internally you create your numbers, but then you go out, you share that with the analyst community. We had 14 analysts covering Axonics. They make predictions about what you've said to them, and then they do their own interpretation. But if you don't beat the analyst consensus, you're dog meat. Okay, your stock's going down. Okay, so you need to do that. You better do that. So you got to have a tiger by your tail. Otherwise, being public's not gonna cut the mustard. So you can see, it's very interesting, right? I mean, this was an 11-year journey. From start to finish, for me anyway. And I'm very fortunate that of the folks, I mean, maybe there's a dozen of us who are not continuing. The rest of the people they're at work today.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's just great, and, you also want to be, if you're going to sell something and you care about the people in the company, you want to make sure that company gets placed and your people get placed in the hands of another group of individuals that you feel really good about. And I'll put in a plug for Boston Scientific, because Mike Mahoney, the chairman and CEO, is one of the greatest guys you'll ever meet. He's authentic as the day is long. Mm-hmm. He's got the culture of the company, the way they go about doing business. It matches, with Axonics, and they're really good people,
And I liked the acquisition personally, because sometimes I won't mention some, but there's some acquisitions I've seen where I'm like, that doesn't make sense, and like the culture thing. But when Boston Scientific got Axonics, and they have a great acquisition history, great culture of innovation. I have a lot of respect for Mike Mahoney. We're working on getting him on the show hopefully soon. But I thought it made a lot of sense. And, just to kind of round things together, again, thanks for coming out and spending some time with us. Definitely, I know for a fact that I have the smartest audience in all of healthcare. They're going to say, when are you going to get him back? But until then, last question for you. Now that you're a retired CEO, like, what do you like to do with your time?
Well, so, it's funny because people say, oh, congratulations, that's great. So I hear you're retired. Yes, I'm retired from the CEO business. Okay. I'm not going to do another CEO gig, but I'm on a couple boards today. I'm working with a number of venture firms as a venture advisor. I love medical technology. I'm super intellectually curious, and I think I have a lot of experience that I can share you know what I mean, with
agree.
others. So that's what I'm interested in. It's just, so I'm engaged, I'm involved, I'm intellectually curious about lots of cool stuff that's out there. Given where I'm at in my life and all the rest, and I've worked really hard for 44 years nonstop. It's time to, not be accountable for everybody and everything, and board work is great work if you can get it. And it's a lot of fun it's great. So I will continue, to, pick and choose amongst the opportunities that make some sense. Today is the 11th of December.
Mm-hmm.
Today, a company I joined the board of a few months ago filed for an IPO. Okay.
That's exciting.
So that's
Congrats.
cool, right? So, you know what I mean? So, the public stuff is not something everybody has a lot of experience with, right? Mm-hmm. So, once again, not either understanding or be willing to pay the price. Like you shouldn't, if you're a CEO who doesn't enjoy bantering with fund managers and getting asked uncomfortable questions, then
Going
you
public's
shouldn't
probably not a good idea.
It's not a good thing for you to do, So anyway.
Well, look, I'm very happy to hear that. I love working in this industry. I'm very proud of it. And I think that it's very important that people like you, with your experience, your insights and everything, that, there's no retirement. Like you're not done yet, And so I'm happy to hear that you're moving on to this next phase to help more medtech companies. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what's important to me is that having somebody like you continuing to do work within the industry, not as a CEO, but now as a board member, as an advisor, et cetera, is only going to benefit even more patients. And I would even say that maybe this new phase of your career, you might be able to impact even more patient lives than you had before previously.
Perhaps, right? I just think that, I'll make the following statement. As Americans, we're capitalists. Okay, so it's okay to make money in America. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Mm-hmm. But when you have an opportunity to be able to do well for yourself and your family and your colleagues by helping other people have a better quality of life, I don't see how it gets better than that. I sleep really well at night knowing hundreds of thousands of people have a better quality of life because we worked our ass off and endeavored in this field. That is wonderful. So that's what's special about our business, and pharma is interesting and all that, but medical devices are tangible. It's real. I
agree.
It's, it's
I'm with you.
Patient by patient. It's not something that, people pop in their mouth or whatever. You know what I mean? It's really cool. It's like hand-to-hand combat, right?
That is very much.
Yeah. So I love the business. It's been great. Somebody told me many, many, many years ago, Ray, the thing about the medical device business, in the best of times, it doesn't suck too bad. And in the worst of times, it doesn't suck too bad.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to have to use that. Well, Ray, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm going to remind our listeners first, go give Ray a follow on LinkedIn. Be sure to like and subscribe this episode. If you love this episode, hey, take this, forward it on to another entrepreneur, forward it on to a rep. We find a lot of value in connecting our audience. And of course, we're the #1 show for a reason, because of you, the audience. Give us 5 stars, write a review, and we'll stay in that #1 spot. I'm your host, Omar Khatib, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who would really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.